All right, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are joining us today for this webinar. We thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Dr. Tashina Reeder, and I am glad and thrilled that this is the last week of AM. Can you believe it? The fifth week of June, everyone. June flew by really quickly. So if you have been a part of the other webinars since the beginning, I hope that you had an experience, that you've been informed, you've learned some new things, and all of that jazz. And so today, I am glad to have this webinar with some wonderful presenters. But before we get started, I have a few things I would like to inform you of. One, there were a few questions that was posted in the Q&A box. We can't see your names. If you changed your name in the when you registered, or in your, if you go to, you could change your name on your own. I can't think of how to do it off the cuff, but you can change your name to make it invisible, right? For those who asked in the chat, I can't see one of your names, but if you want your name to be removed, just change your name. And I believe it's the section where it says participants, or wherever you can change your own name. Okay, with that being said, let me get into this webinar. The chat box has been disabled, so you will not be able to utilize the chat box to communicate with us. However, you can use the Q&A box to ask your questions, to participate there, okay? At the end of this webinar, I will then ask all of your questions or responses as directed by the presenters in the Q&A box, okay? So don't be shy. Ask your questions and all of that, and make comments so we can interact with you that way, okay? So without further ado, one more thing, I almost forgot. Before, at the end of the webinar, do not log off, right? You will be prompted to complete a survey. We want to hear from you and hear the feedback you have for today's presentation, okay? So don't log off. You're going to get a link that asks you to complete the survey, okay? And if you don't receive the survey, you can always email us at cheetah.org, okay? Without further ado, I'm going to turn over this presentation to Keith.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next new normal, strategies for elders navigating the impact of COVID. So my name is Keith Carter. I'm one of the volunteers at the William Way Center, at the Elder Initiative, rather. And what the EI really is we really try to focus on aging successfully at any age for the LGBT older adults. So if you want further information more information about the programs and services provided by the EI, please visit our website, which we'll put in the chat, so you'll be able to access that. And we'll get you all the information that you need. So today, we're going to have three panelists. Our first panelist will be Michael Tyler Ramos, followed by Michael Byrne, and followed by Suja Matthew. Our first panelist, however, was due to some health issues, and he'll explain that in his opening, had to pre-record his presentation. So without further ado, I present Michael Tyler Ramos. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Tyler Ramos. I am the founder and executive director of MTR Therapy. I am also the founder of Get Lit, Live Your Truth. This is a new nonprofit that we're launching this year. And the goal of Get Lit is to create financial scholarships for those who are on state-sponsored plans like Medicaid, and who also have high deductible plans, to support them in accessing mental health care. So I want to first give a shout out to David Griffin, the folks over at the Elder Initiative, for inviting me to speak on this panel and to be a part of this process with you guys. I also want to give a shout out to the folks at Philadelphia Fight, who continue to step up behind the scenes to do the work that needs to be done, and to sort of like create this intentional space over the years for us to sort of like come together and speak about our experiences and share what works for us. With that said, I want to apologize that I'm not present and live, and part of that is because I am recovering right now from an episode. I have been diagnosed recently with post-COVID syndrome, so this is news for me, and I'm currently processing and also recovering from my episode. So right now, I feel strong enough to do this. I wrote some of my notes down so I won't forget what I really wanted to highlight. And then I'm going to discuss a little bit about where do we go from here. So when I think of COVID and the pandemic and so forth, I think it's important to look at it from a traumatic lens. It was a forced change that wreaked havoc on all of our lives. It forced us into isolation. And I think that anything that's forced upon us can be traumatic to a degree. With that said, I think it's also important to look at the layers of trauma that we're talking about here. COVID is a community trauma. It's a global trauma that we're all experiencing in various different levels, even those who have privilege. But I think privilege also allows for some folks to navigate it differently. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge these things. For those of us who identify as BIPOC, non-white, and we look at the mortality rates and we look at everything that's been going on with the last presidency and the rise of white supremacy in ways that I've never seen it, that mirrors the Confederacy of back then. That's also a type of trauma that we're navigating. So we're looking at potentially identity trauma, community trauma, firsthand trauma if we tested positive for COVID and so forth, and how to recover from it. Also, have we lost anyone? And also looking at grief and traumatic grief and separating the two. Even if we've lost someone very close to us, how are we processing that? Because again, if we're not able to grieve in the way that maybe we've been taught, or maybe grieving in our ideal way, that can also be considered a type of trauma. So think about the digestion of some of these experiences. Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling sort of like there's no tomorrow? I know for me, these are some thoughts that have crossed my mind, but what has got me through some of these challenges is support and community, and sort of like reevaluating those in my life and sort of like reflecting what do I need right now and who do I need it from? I think it's important, no matter what is going on, to at least acknowledge its presence, even if you don't have the words to describe it. Acknowledgement is critical, especially in these times. Work on the language later, but at least acknowledge its existence. You won't be in a state of denial by acknowledging it. I think that once it's acknowledged and you're able to sort of see it and hold it, you work towards understanding it. And understanding it is sort of like, what does it look like? How does it feel? Where does it land in your body? What activates it or provokes it? And I think that once you gain understanding of what is present, then you can work towards changing it if you have to, or at least managing it better. Here are some mantras that I follow presently. You can't hold what you don't see. And if you see it, then you need to understand it in order to then change it or manage it better. Self-care for me is a type of self-preservation, and I think it looks different for everyone, and I think it's kind of going back to basics. What speaks to you? What calms you? What brings you joy? What sort of like makes you feel at peace with certain things? People in my field may suggest yoga, mindfulness, and a whole bunch of other stuff that may not land well with you. Don't do it. Keep it simple. Is there a song that relaxes you? Is there a skit from a show, or is there a show that maybe makes you laugh, out loud? I think laughter and humor is key, and I find those spaces to be very therapeutic, what type of support system you have. And I think it's important to at least, I'm a firm believer, all we need is one person who sees us and understands us, even though they may not always agree with us or agree with what we're doing in the moment. But at least they support us unconditionally. And I think that outside of family and chosen family, unconditional love is critical. And I feel blessed to have people in my life who support me in ways that I never thought I even deserve at times. And I think that these are one of many privileges that I have that is allowing me to navigate the challenges before me. Grief is real. So some of us are grieving people that we've lost, and all of us are grieving the ideal that this is not what we wanted, the ideal that even when we connect via Zoom, we prefer to be in person. So I think it's important to at least acknowledge and really expand what grief is other than death. We are all grieving ideals and situations, and that looks like depression. So if you're already struggling with a baseline of depression, your grief, whether you're losing someone or you are grieving an ideal, will make the depression stronger. So here's what I'm saying to you. It's normal. Just acknowledge its presence. Seek support. If you don't have someone that you feel comfortable with, call a hotline, call the Elder Initiative, we MTR Therapy on the second Saturday of every month. We offer a free virtual walk-in space via Zoom. There are plenty of support systems out there in the community, both close, nearby, and beyond and far away. If you struggled with anxiety, your anxiety levels are going to go up. And I think that one of the things we need to be mindful of, and here are some things I want you all to think about. As we move towards reintegration to whatever normal was pre-pandemic, a hug may never be the same for us. Hearing a sneeze or a cough, how are we going to react to that? For us in the community, we are used to greeting and kissing each other, even folks that we haven't seen in a while. Is that going to change? Is there going to be hesitation around that? Do you want to be in that type of space or environment? So all of these things, I think, as we move towards reintegration, I think it's important to just acknowledge some of these things. Yes, wearing a mask might feel weird, or now not wearing a mask may also feel weird. These are some things that I have experienced recently. And as I've seen family members and friends that I haven't seen in a while, that initial presence is sort of like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. But then there's this hesitation of, do I hug? Do I shake? So again, this is real. This is the reality that we are in right now. So I think it's important to take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, because again, we can spiral mentally, and if we're spiraling, we're going to be symptomatic of not just depression, anxiety, and maybe trauma. I think for in building a bridge, COVID for some folks, especially the generation before me who survived and experienced the HIV epidemic, for some of these folks, COVID is a reenactment of the epidemic. It's a reenactment in so many ways. One is the unknown, and the loss of life almost immediately with the unknown. I think more specifically, when we sort of start diving into it more and more, who is COVID impacting the most? These are communities of color. And when we look at sort of just like government and systemic racism and just any type of ism, we are navigating systemic racism, like layers and layers of transphobia, homophobia, so all of these things are present. The political rhetoric also mirrors that of the HIV epidemic. We politicize wearing a mask in the same way that we politicize using a condom. And I think that it's important to see these connections because history in some ways has repeated itself. And I think in order to avoid this repetitive cycle, we need to fully, again, we can't change what we don't see. And if we see it, we need to understand it to then change it. And I think COVID is also teaching us a lot. And it's also showing us the need for access to healthcare, access to services. And now, as I navigate this new diagnosis of mine, for those of us who tested positive for COVID and survived it, that's a blessing that we have. At the same time, do you find yourself forgetting things? Do you find yourself maybe like being more reactive to certain things? Do you find yourself beating yourself up? So again, be kind to yourself. There's a reason why these things are happening. If you can't fully describe it, at least acknowledge its presence and then work towards language there later. One of the things that I've done as a way to heal, because I cannot engage in any physical activity, I've started to color and watch and listen to music, that reminds me of my childhood. These I have found grounding. And because it's hard for me sometimes to read pages, a friend of mine recently suggested read your comic books. Because the photos and the short sort of like narrative, at least you're working that part of your brain, but don't push yourself, stay within your limits. So I think that's another key for those of us who may be struggling with post-COVID syndrome. These symptoms are real and we might be experiencing this indefinitely. Who's to say? Because doctors are still trying to figure this out. So I want to close by just, again, honoring yourselves. And I think we honor ourselves by being true to who we are, whoever that person is. I think making connections is key, so reconnecting with either a younger version of yourself or with those who are close to you. But remember, we may not see them yet in person, but just staying connected and using technology may be the dose of healing that we need in that particular moment. So I look forward to being in person at some point when I'm fully recovered. And I want to just also, again, say thank you to David at the Elder Initiative for allowing me to pre-record this. And I also want to give a special shout out to my staff at MTR Therapy, who has been very supportive with not only my recent diagnosis, but in sort of like stepping up and doing the work to try to meet the needs of the community. So with that said, I will leave you with the rest of the panelists with peace and love. Be kind to yourself. I will see you soon. Thank you.
Well, that was a great presentation by Michael Tyler Ramos. I want to thank you for that and for our speedy recovery as well. So our next presenter is going to be Michael Byrne, and Michael's going to talk about rebuilding your support network in the post-COVID world. So without further ado, Mr. Michael Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I also want to introduce you to Fanny, who is mighty cute, but also super anxious. So like a lot of us are right now, right? So I'm Michael Byrne. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, therapist, working with older adults. I work at Jewish Family and Children's Services of Philadelphia as a mobile therapist. And I'm really excited to be on this panel today. I've been a volunteer with the Elder Initiative as a board member and now as a support committee member, and help facilitate their monthly Thrivers support group, which is focused on folks with who are long-term survivors of HIV. and I really love working with thrivers. So welcome today. Thank you for joining us. So I'm really here to talk about how do we reconnect, right? Because we've, the pandemic kind of put a forced stop on our lives in so many ways, and we disconnected and found ourselves just kind of in this new normal, which really affected us emotionally and behaviorally and physically. So how do we reconnect? Well, we start off by checking in on ourselves and what are we comfortable with, right? So take stock on what you're comfortable with. What are your boundaries around reconnecting with people? Because some people want a hug. Some people want to just take the mask off and never put the mask on again. Other people, guess what? I feel really protected by this mask and I'm going to keep this mask on, and I'm going to wear this mask everywhere. Oh, you've been vaccinated? I don't care. I'm wearing my mask, and that's their choice. And that's what makes them feel comfortable. What makes you feel comfortable? What are your boundaries? What is going to make you feel safe? What's going to make you feel healthy? And then when you do reconnect with people, life changed for all of us. So realizing that your life changed, right? Well, their life changed as well. So when you're reconnecting with folks that you haven't been with for a while, realize that, yeah, it is about you, but it's not all about you. And so many of the ways that we connect with other people is by listening and being interested in what happened for them. Because when we hear what happened for them, we also find all these other different connections in ways that, oh my God, I experienced that too. Because there are moments in our lives where we think we are the only person that is experiencing this really horrible, uncomfortable thing. Or I'm the only person that thinks like this or has these thoughts. Because we've all had, I know, I've had some crazy thoughts over the past year, right? And I'm not the only one, right? But when we are interested in listening to others, we find that we aren't alone, and we find that place to connect with them again. And really kind of trying to stay in the moment with them and be present with them. Because you know how you have conversations with people and while they're talking, you're thinking about what you're going to say next? Try not to do that. So instead of thinking of, oh, I'm going to tell this story, and like you're formulating the story in your head while they're talking, actually try to be present. Try to be present with that person. Because, over the past year, we haven't been present. So actually being present with another person and really staying in the moment instead of in the future when you get to talk, or trying to finish their story for them in your head, because we don't know where their story is going. So if we stay with them in the moment and reflect back to them what it is that they're saying, then they feel heard. Now, also, even if it's not something that you connect with and that you don't really get to that place where we had the same experience, oh my God, we are simpatico here. trying to find a place of empathy to connect with them so that while you're listening to them, really listen so that you can reflect to them how they are feeling. Because so much of what has separated us and made us feel outside is not being seen. So if somebody just simply said, wow, that feels really hard, that must have been really difficult. You must have been so sad. You must have been so scared. You feel seen. And then we can also then connect on how you felt scared, right? Because vulnerability, honesty, and being honestly vulnerable with another person can be uncomfortable, but it's also how we connect with others. So really being honestly vulnerable and talking about your truth and about what happened over this past year, because what happened over the past, 15 months, it's really scary. And for a lot of folks, I know for quite a few of my clients who are my age or older, who lived through the AIDS crisis, COVID was really triggering. It really triggered so many memories, so many scary memories for us of a time when we wondered, when is it me? Am I going to get it? Who's dying next? What is it? Where is it? Who has it? And for folks that lived through the 80s and 90s and lost so many people, the grief that we've experienced or the triggering of the societal trauma that we experienced then happened with COVID. And we don't know how COVID affected those folks that we have not been in contact with. We don't know who they've lost or even if they had gotten the COVID themselves. So being vulnerable ourselves and really being present and vulnerable and honest about how we feel gives them permission and encouragement to be vulnerable with us. And then we really are connecting. And be interested. Really be interested in hearing what they have to say. I think I already talked about, really kind of listening and staying in the moment, but really be interested. Ask questions, probe a little bit, because folks are vulnerable. We're all still vulnerable, right? So they may need a little bit of pulling out and sussing out what they're feeling and what they experienced. And being interested brings connection. And people that know me are gonna roll their eyes and be like, oh God, here it goes again. But gratitude, finding gratitude. I truly believe that gratitude, living in a state of gratitude is my goal every day. And that happiness does not bring gratitude. Gratitude brings happiness. And I truly, truly believe that. So there are people that we care about, that we were connected to before the pandemic, that we have not connected with, and we've been out of touch with. And how do I reach back out to them? They're not going to want to talk to me. They're going to think that I completely blew them off. I have, but there are folks that have been in our lives at different points in our lives that we really, really care about, and we really would like to reconnect. And I know I have them. So we all have those people, right, that we are not connected with anymore. But gosh, I'd like to be connected with them again. Reaching out to them from gratitude and really being vulnerable and saying or writing in a note, not many people do snail mail anymore. And every time the mailman comes, it seems like, oh, it's just bills and flyers and, junk mail, right? But when you get an actual piece of mail that's from a human being, that's actually written to you, that actually speaks about feelings, writing a thank you note to somebody, or a reach out and connect note is what I'm trying to talk about. It's like, I've been thinking about you, and I'm so grateful for what you have given my life. And I haven't seen you. I haven't spoken to you, but gosh, I would love to. And or even saying that in a phone call, we haven't talked in a while, but I've been thinking about you an awful lot. And I'm so grateful for you and whatever it is, that the times that we used to go to the beach, going for walks, going out to a club, or, whatever it was that made the connection was, that memory, I'm so grateful for this memory. And I'm so grateful for you, and really wanted to connect and reach out and see what's going on with you. How are you? How have you been? This has been a really crazy 15 months, or even if it's been, I haven't talked to them in 10 years. You came into my mind, and I realized that I've always been holding you in my heart. So you've never really left. I've always held you in my heart, but I haven't thought and haven't spoken to you in so long. And I just thought, wow, this past 15 months have been crazy. I wonder what's going on with Joe. How's Joe made it through? Interest. And then it's time to listen and be interested, But if we connect through gratitude, and express our gratitude and our love, it takes some of those rough edges away, of why we haven't, because there's a million reasons why people fall out of our lives or tumble into our lives, and life gets busy, and life gets anxious, and life gets depressed sometimes, right? But finding those ways to connect, finding those reasons of why they were a part of your life to begin with, and inviting them back into your life can be really, really important. And speaking on gratitude, I can't stop talking about gratitude without encouraging everybody to have their own gratitude practice, so that you start every day with gratitude and that you end every day with gratitude. And I know for myself, I carry a gratitude stone in my pocket. And in the morning when I put it in my pocket, I tell myself what I'm grateful for. And every night when I take it out of my pocket, I tell myself what I'm grateful for. And during the day, if I get anxious or I get angry or I get sad, I grab a hold of my stone and I remind myself of what is good and what I'm grateful for. And even on those days when things are really, really bad, we can find gratitude in the difficult moments. And flipping that script and finding that gratitude is really, really important. But lastly, also, there are organizations like the EI to connect with, but are there any hobbies or interests that you have that you've never really dove deeply into, that you can start a new club, start doing a craft of some kind? There are ways of connecting with others in groups. And if you have an idea of a group that doesn't exist, that would be a cool thing for the EI to do, give David Griffith a call at the EI and be like, you know what, I've been thinking about this. Because the EI is always looking to find new ways of connecting seniors and building connections for community for all of us. And I guarantee you're not the only person that would be interested. Even if you think it's the most esoteric, wacky thing in the world, someone else is going to want to do it. I guarantee it. That's all I've got. But I welcome any questions anybody has.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Byrne. That was very great. So our next presenter is going to be Suja Matthew, and she's going to be talking about mental health access. So without further ado, Suja.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Phew. Thank you first also to Michael Byrne for your presentation and your honest sharing. I love when other like-minded folks talk about gratitude, because I could also go on and on about that. And also, of course, thanks to Michael Tyler Ramos for his powerful presentation, and I do wish him healing. And of course, again, thank you to the Elder Initiative for asking us to be on this panel, and for Phil Fight for making this opportunity available. So as Keith said, I'm Suja Matthew. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And just a little bit about myself for you. I'm a South Asian Indian American. I'm a member of the LGBTQ+ communities. I'm a person with lived experience in recovery from alcohol use, and an advocate for marginalized populations. As far as what I do, I work for a division under the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, or DBHIDS, called Community Behavioral Health. I have a clinical counseling background, and I've been employed there probably almost 13 years now. I very recently, actually, just over a week ago, transitioned from being DBHIDS's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Operations Manager to Community Behavioral Health's Employee Learning and Professional Development Manager within the HR department there. And a main part of my current role is to ensure necessary tools are provided to employees there, equitable resources, just anything that they need for their learning and professional development needs. Let's see, long walks on the beach, no, I'm kidding. But I do want to add what I find energizing with my time includes my role as a steering committee member of the Philadelphia Asian and Queer Group, Married Life. I also engage intentionally in spiritual practice, as well as my 10-year-old fur baby. And that cat's name is Captain Starbucks. So if any sci-fi fans are there, there's that. And I wanted to be intentional about sharing all of this, because these are the things I feel like resonate for me when you have both Michaels talking about what works for you, or what are the things that you can do to help yourself during these times. And, we already have the tools in our toolbox, and just figuring out what works best for us during these times. And for me, it's my spiritual practice, my cat, being intentionally present with my wife, doing the work that I do that I love, and being of service to others. So hopefully you've gained new knowledge through what Michael Tyler Ramos and Michael Byrne just shared. Very helpful information and ideas. So again, thanks to both of them for their wisdom and sharing. So to recap a little, to connect, as Michael Tyler Ramos actually stated, we're all here, right, as having experienced not only individual traumas around this pandemic or loss and grief, but also community trauma and community grief and community loss. And we are here at different levels of survival, whatever that looks like for you. Whether you feel like you've been barely surviving this whole time, last 15 months or so, or you've been thriving somehow, or some of us have our ups and downs with what that looks like. And I wanted to highlight and reiterate what they've shared about the importance of building and rebuilding your social support networks, avoiding isolation, especially if that brings you to a not so good place, and about taking care of your overall wellness. And these are the themes that I hope resonate with many of you. So to add to that, we want to go a little deeper into talking about mental health services or behavioral health services, and what does that actually look like in our city. And first and foremost, we want to backtrack a little to talk about how do you break that stigma, if that exists for you, around accessing mental health services. For some folks, therapy is the thing that gives them life. It's the life-saving service, right? And for others, it's a wellness check that helps to sustain them, keeps them going day by day, keeps them balanced. And for others, it's a no, not for me kind of a thing, right? And especially if some folks grew up with stories about mental health or therapy in a way that was not in a good light. Maybe there was negative language attached to it for you. Like only certain people or certain kinds of people go to a therapist, or I'm not that sick or that kind of sick, or I don't have a problem. Maybe you had that family member who was suffering and experiencing mental health challenges, but maybe was shunned or ostracized. And some believe the therapist won't know how to help them with their specific needs, or that they had an upbringing or been around others who believe that, to admit needing therapy means you're admitting that you're weak, or that you just need to keep it together and you just need to be stronger. And we can go on, right? And also for myself, as an example, I come from an ethnic background where you definitely don't talk about these things. You keep it all into yourself. And I know I'm not alone in that. But what we know also is, unfortunately, the things that can happen to us, especially our bodies, when we keep all of that stuff in, and it's just not good, and then things snowball from there, right? And then for a lot of people, especially in marginalized communities, therapy is something that's not affordable, and so we'll get into that a little later too. But going back to this, the stigma piece around mental health, how do we begin to break that? And you just start with yourself, right? You want to think about normalizing getting that mental health care, whatever that looks like. It should be no different really than realizing that you need physical health care for your physical health needs, right? And some of you may have even said this yourselves, that, when you're trying to explain to somebody, if you're having chest pain, to call 911 and go to your nearest ER. If you broke an ankle, you hurt yourself, same thing. If you're taking medication for diabetes, cholesterol, what have you, to keep up with your doctor's appointments, getting your refills. Some people do this better than others. But you want to just keep talking about it, right? When you talk about stigma breaking, keep bringing it up. Keep letting others know that if you're not okay, but also let others know that it's okay for them not to be okay. Chances are you're not the only one feeling a certain way. Michael Byrne just said that too, right? Like, you're not going to, you think you're in your own bubble, but then you find out you're not. We're not the only ones experiencing these things. One of the ways that the organization I work for at DBH IDS, that they've been amplifying this breaking of the stigma is through providing amazing resources that you can find on one of our sites, healthymindsphilly.com. And what you can find here, everything from what's called mental health first aid trainings and opportunities for those trainings, which, by the way, anyone can take these. So if you yourself feel like, you know what, I want to do something, but I'm not a therapist or I'm not in that field, it doesn't matter. Mental health first aid training is actually a nationwide program. And in our city, DBH IDS does offer this training. They've been doing it for, various groups of folks. And again, you don't need a mental health profession to obtain the certification. And the good thing about the certification is that they do offer this training specifically for older adults as well. So if you feel like this is something that you would like to do and have some skills, these are just general skills. Again, it's not therapy, but these are general skills to help folks identify if they're not feeling well, what's happening, and just kind of doing those general screenings and getting them to the right place. These trainings do exist for a variety of groups, and again, specifically for older adults as well. Also on Healthy Minds Philly, you will find a section on coping with COVID-19, section on addressing trauma, to resources on many topics, blogs, contact numbers, even a way to take your own mental health screening if you feel up to it, and you can take this anonymously. And very recently, actually, for Mental Health Awareness Month back in May, DBH IDS, along in partnership with the Mayor of City of Philadelphia and Independence Blue Cross, rolled out a campaign called Boost Your Mood. And through this campaign, which you can find through Healthy Minds Philly, again, tons of resources, material to share. When you do go on that page, I really like what's displayed at the bottom of the page, which says, we all can fight stigma, educate and inspire others. So check on yourself, your friends, and your family, and access mental health resources. That's it. That's the whole point, right? These are the things we can do. And if you are a person who likes to share graphics and materials on social media, they have a ton of those as well around boosting your mood. So beyond all this, when we talk about mental health access, how do you actually access these resources, right? And are there lower cost options as well? And as we all know, navigating any system is difficult enough, let alone the world of mental health or substance use disorder related services. So if you're a resident of Philadelphia, you may, and if you're an older adult, you may or may not be aware of your option through what's called community health choices, or because everyone loves acronyms, we'll just call it CHC. So CHC is Pennsylvania's mandatory managed care program, specifically for dually eligible individuals, as well as individuals with physical disabilities. And in our city in Philadelphia, and this is statewide, but in Philadelphia, this was implemented in January of 2019. So, who's eligible? Basically, Philadelphia residents 21 and older, technically, who receive both Medicare and Medicaid, and that's what I mean by dual eligible, who also receive long-term services and supports through the waiver system, and those receiving care in a nursing home that's paid by Medicaid. Also, for those who are enrolled in CHC, you end up being enrolled in either of 3 managed care organizations. So either Keystone First, UPMC, or PA Health and Wellness. And then what happens is, for any behavioral health service that you need, so through, whether it's for therapy, mental health services, drug and alcohol services, that coverage, if you're a CHC member, comes through community behavioral health for those residents of Philadelphia. And as far as who's not eligible, just, for CHC per the state, individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability who are eligible for services through the Department of Human Services Office of Development Programs, or ODP, as well as residents in a state-operated nursing facility, including state veterans home. So going back to the behavioral or mental health services for Philadelphia, again, CBH is the organization that funds these services for you. So if you have questions, how do I find that list of providers though for what I'm seeking, no matter your age? You can certainly go to cbhphilly.org, or you can contact someone who will assist you through CBH's member services, which is 888-545-2600. And I believe we will make sure that this information is also entered in the chat for anyone who needs to hear that or see that again. Yeah, and that's kind of general. To wrap up again. When you talk about accessing mental health services, I think it's important to talk first about, looking inward as far as what stigma or what ideas or thoughts do you have yourself around therapy, and finding ways to dispel those myths or stories that you've heard of or grew up with. And maybe you've also had a lot of experiences, right, going to therapy, and maybe they weren't the best. But talk about it, though. Still talk about it to somebody else. Bring it up to folks. Help yourself breaking that stigma. And again, there's so many resources out there to just reach out to someone, and hopefully you'll be able to get the service that you need. That's my part. Thank you.
Okay, well, wow, thank you very much, Suja. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Michael, Ramos, Michael Burns, and Suja Matthews. So now we're going to move on to our Q&A portion of the presentation. So one of the first questions that we have here is going to be around barriers to access, and that Suja was just talking about. So to our panelists, the question is, the reliance of telehealth and other virtual services over the past 50 months has created a new barriers for individuals who don't have reliable access to technology, as well as older adults who are not comfortable with technology, like myself. How can we address the digital divide in the provision of mental health services? So any one of you want to take that?
And take my mic off there. Well, what I will say quickly is I do want to reiterate, when we talk about telehealth or other services and barriers, and older adults especially, reach out to CBH. They do contract with a ton of providers who have had to pivot, right? They've had to pivot and use telehealth to make sure that their folks are receiving the care that they need. And if their folks are unable to use that technology, they have had to work on it. And a lot of providers have gotten creative and been able to do the work. So I would say reach out to CBH to see what is available. And also, as far as, how do we address that divide in the provision of mental health services, and how do we make sure it doesn't fall off, especially as folks, go back to whatever new normal looks like. I would just say those of us who are in positions where we can make a difference, continue to brainstorm, ensure the conversations continue about the disparities, about the gaps in services, about what needs are missing or not being addressed for groups, including our LGBTQ plus elders. What are the needs? What is not happening? And just keeping those conversations going at the levels that we can in city government, at state level. I think that's just really important on our end. It's doing our due diligence with that.
I'd also like to add that, there are folks that have really appreciated telehealth. And I know with some of my clients, I'm getting back to in-person therapy with some folks, but other folks are like, I'm good. Let's do phone, let's do Zoom. And that's okay too, So asking for what you need, finding the help that you need that works for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe some access to the digital divide and issues. Now that libraries and other places are opening up, people will have access to those as well who don't necessarily have a phone or computer or whatever. So our next question is related to online therapy. So do you expect online therapy is going to remain a common practice post-pandemic? And what are the best practices or tips for individuals who are accessing telehealth services for their mental health needs?
Yeah, I think it's here to stay. I hope it's here to stay. We'll see if our elected officials agree with us. But at this point, we're still permitted. The state and federal governments have some control over what is permitted as far as therapy to bill Medicare or Medicaid. But right now, it still all works. And I think, I had a client who was very, very anxious and had a lot of anxiety around leaving her apartment. And COVID worked really well for her. She really, it's been an amazing time for her to really dial down that anxiety and look at it in an easier way. So I think telehealth is here to stay, I hope.
Yeah, I echo what Michael is saying. Yes, yes, and yes, right? For one, people need help. And again, what better way, during these hard times, especially for folks I've learned, like Michael just shared that example, there are plenty of folks who have had their own specific reasons for not, you know, getting therapy before, a lot of it having to do, whether it's with the travel, spending money on said travel, whatever fears or anxieties they may hold, and talk about, wow, we just took those things away by offering telehealth, and now people are getting the care that they need. That's a benefit that's helping people get better and stay better. So hopefully that also stays. And then in terms of any tips for access, from a coverage perspective, again, please contact your behavioral health insurance, whether it's CVH or Medicare, whoever it is, making sure that you also just talk to others, ask questions, go online. Yeah, just seeking what's available. It can't hurt to just, even if you can't, if you know the therapist that you're thinking about, call them, ask them what do they provide, let them know what your needs are.
Very much. Thank you very much for that. So we have got another question, number 3. So some individuals seeking mental health services express a preference for finding a mental health professional who shares similar beliefs, ideas, culture, and life experiences. For example, an older adult might feel happier being with a therapist at their same age. A person of color may prefer someone who's of the same ethnic background as them. What advice do you have for people who are more comfortable with mental health professionals who share certain identities? And before I would go on with that question, I always tell people from my experiences that when you find a therapist, it's not a marriage. So you can get divorced at any time if you're not feeling comfortable with that therapist, if you're not getting what you need. So I wonder what our panelists think of that.
Yeah, if I could jump in, that's great that you say that, because that is so true, right? You don't have to be stuck to that person. And I want to also acknowledge that when you do start with somebody, it's hard, right? Because you're putting everything out there, and the thought of having to start over again can also feel like a lot. But I do appreciate this question because it's true and it's real. For someone seeking therapy, you may or may not already face the stigma, let alone, uncomfortable feelings around, how is this place going to be a safe space for me? And what does safe space look like for me? With someone who knows where you're coming from, where you are in life, where you've been, where you don't feel like you have to, share your whole life story over and over again, to someone who might not have any clue what that life story could even, they can't even imagine what that would look like. But I would say, advocate for yourself in finding the person that you feel most comfortable with. And funny story, before Michael shares, a funny story about this for myself. I used to always say I wanted this, right? I wanted very specific Indian therapist, queer. And then I realized, so I did. I saw somebody who was not part of the LGBTQ communities, but Indian background. And what I noticed immediately was that it wasn't working, because I had to really explain a lot of the other parts of me and my identities that I realized that she had no true understanding of. And so, yeah, so just bottom line, you never know. unless you make that first move though and find out how that goes for you.
And when you're doing an intake with an organization that provides therapy, being super clear about what works best for you. So if having a Spanish speaking therapist would make life so much easier for you, let that be known, you know, because those connections can be made.
Thank you very much.
And you know, Suja's right, you know, there's so, and Keith's right, you know, you might not, the first therapist you come in contact with might be like, oh, no, I don't think so. And that happened for me too, you know, but then finding that connection, but also making sure you give it enough of a moment, because what might appear on the surface is not, if you dig a little deeper, then it's like, oh wow, yeah, you see me, you know, and so much of it is actually you see me. So realizing that this person, though they may be different, actually is the right person for me.
Thank you very much. So I would stay married to both of you anyway, so don't worry about it. So our next question that I have is, the pandemic has been really hard for all of us for many reasons and that we've talked about today. Are there ways, though, that you would advise folks on how to find some kind of positive spin on what has happened in the past 15 months? Like, what positivity can you take away from COVID?
So there, you know, it's like my conversation about gratitude, right? So even when things are at the very, very worst, we can find something to be grateful for, right? So that I'm being reflective of myself. I'm concentrating on my needs. I'm grateful that I'm able to focus on myself. But even on the very worst days, one thing that we can always reframe, the very worst day, you know, if you just imagine the worst day possible, we can always reframe with, I'm doing the best I can. And that is honest, and it's positive, and it's affirming, and it's you know, you're speaking truth, and you're speaking affirming truth to yourself. I'm doing, you know, so when that negative voice is going off inside of your head, because you know what, you're not the only one with a negative voice. We all have the negative voice, and it's never saying anything nice to us. You know, that voice inside our head is not telling us how fabulous we are. You know, we have to train ourselves to catch that voice and flip the script on it and tell ourselves that we're fabulous. But the voice is not saying we're fabulous, right? So that even when that voice is screaming and it's really, you know, it's really, really loud, we can tell that voice, I am doing the best I can.
I love that. We've all been in this together, right? The pandemic may have pushed humanity to the edge, however that looks for groups, individuals, each of us. But with all the bad, the grief, the loss, what also has continued is the good. You know, and I strongly believe in that. And there is a resilience factor there, especially when talking about, you know, aging. Folks who have been aging know this. You know, those who have experienced this know this. For those who have witnessed this, you know, resilience and good continue to exist also. So, you know, as stated before, you know, keep looking into what helped you get through the day, what helps you get up in the morning, what do you look forward to? You know, the food we enjoy, the plants, the nature, meditation. As Michael Tyler Ramos stated earlier in his recording, what feels grounding to you, right? Like that's the biggest thing we look for is grounding, especially when we're going through our anxieties in life. What grounds you, and do that. You know, there's always something new to learn, but also what have you done in the past that worked for you? You know, it might have felt like the world broke apart these last 15 minutes, but before that you were living, and what were you doing during those times? You know, and I also love sharing about what I'm grateful for all the time. But does that mean that, you know, the gratitude or appreciation I focus on hides the bad, or that I don't have bad days? No, not at all, right? Resilience says that it all exists, the good and the bad. And, you know, like Michael just said, it's you're acknowledging that, and that's fine. What you can do is fine. So, you know, I like to encourage everyone to always ask themselves, do your check-ins. You know, how am I doing today? You know, I don't feel good. Maybe you have a feeling in your body that doesn't feel good, and do that scan. I love body scans. I love to, because I used to not be good at that. And I'd be the person being like, I have this shoulder pain all the time. And then I realized, oh, I hunch a lot, especially when I'm stressed or not feeling confident. You know, it's a thing that I do. But check in with yourself, you know. And for some people, having an accountability partner helps also. You know, share what you plan to do as part of your wellness that day. And if you can get somebody else to also do a thing that's part of their wellness that day, that's helpful also.
Yeah, and I'll just share one of the positive things that came out of the COVID pandemic for me was we have a Friday check-in call with the Elder Initiative, and there is no way in my past I would have ever connected with some of the people in this call. And now I've found a few friends that I talk to. It's not once a day, twice a day, but at least I know that I always have that Friday call to check in with that group of people. I really look forward to that Friday call every Friday at 12 noon. 11, it's now 11 Eastern Standard Time. No, I really look forward to that. It really helps me get through my week. So, and it also made me connect with people I would have never normally connected with. And now they're older, they're wiser, they give me strength, they give me courage. And I appreciate those people each and every day now. So, so now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Reader to see if there are any questions from the Q&A.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you all for your actually calming presentation, but also informative. So thank you all for being transparent and sharing of your expertise and knowledge. So let's get to these questions in the Q&A box. All right, so someone was speaking to what are your thoughts about utilizing imaging to reduce anxiety? So I imagine he's thinking of imagery exercises to minimize his anxiety. So what are your thoughts about that?
I think that's great. You know, I think, you know, whatever we can put into our bag of tricks, and the more things that we have in our bag of tricks, the better. And using imagery is great. So I think one thing that I know that I do with imagery is imagining, you know, it's opening up your mind to imagine that you're every time you breathe in, you're breathing light into your body, and you're filling your body with like cool, calming light. And every time you breathe out, negative, nasty stuff is blowing, like you're actually visualizing something horrible leaving you and good coming in and bad going out. I love it. It works.
Cool. You have some thank yous in here from your dear friend, Marilyn Torres.
Oh, I love you, Marilyn.
We have a couple questions that kind of tie into what you just spoke about in terms of imagery, uses of imagery to manage your anxiety. And to tie in that, another question was asked about your thoughts about grounding techniques to disconnect from negative thoughts reinforced by COVID-19. Do you encourage positive reframing statements? And what are your suggestions or approaches you have for reducing individuals that is experiencing fear response in regards to mental health challenged by COVID-19? The same person, two questions.
Okay, I'll jump into the grounding anxiety piece. You know, super important to when you're feeling really anxious, or even to the point of you're having a panic attack. You know, how can I, you know, when you're at that point where you're having a panic attack, there doesn't seem to be an answer, right? There doesn't seem to be a way to take this anxiety away. There's a dialectical behavioral therapy trick that truly works. And that would, if you fill a sink up with, you know, throw ice in a sink in cold water, or a bowl, a big mixing bowl with ice and cold water, and actually hold your breath and put your face, dunk your head in the sink, dunk your head in the bowl. What that does is it triggers a natural dive response, as if you have been plunged into a freezing lake. You know, you fell through the ice on a lake, and your body, your brain flips a script on your body, and in order to protect your vital organs, it shuts down other parts of your body. And one of the things that it shuts down is your anxiety. And you will immediately, your anxiety will be gone. And now, do we all want to stick our head in a, you know, dunk our head in a sink? You know, no, not my hair, you know, like, but I just got my hair done. Like, no, I don't want to do that. So you don't, it can also work with ice, putting ice on your face, putting an ice pack on the back of your neck. If you always have an ice pack in your freezer that you can then just throw on the back of your neck, it can do the same thing, but it's just a way of tricking your brain into flipping the script on your body and taking away your anxiety.
Thank you for that explanation.
I love that. If I can add to that too, you know, truly acknowledge what you're feeling, because again, like we said, with COVID, many people are feeling this, right? So acknowledge your anxiety around this. It's a true feeling, and ask where you are in the moment that you're experiencing that anxiety. Take out anything that is actively encouraging that anxiety as well. Anything that's triggering the news, social media, especially if it's heightening. And imagine putting that anxiety away, you know, for a time later that will be safe for you to express that anxiety. You know, folks talk about pretending you're putting something in like an imaginary box and just put it away, put it on the shelf, you know, and later when you return to it, it's either gone, or you can return to it. And hopefully when you do allow yourself to experience that anxiety, hopefully you're in a safer space.
Thank you, Suja. Another question, as practitioners, how are you incorporating grief and loss for clients during the pandemic in your practice?
I'm doing that every day with clients, you know, because we're not, we've all thought about grieving when someone dies. But we've also this year been grieving a lot more than the loss of our friends and loved ones. We're grieving our lives. We're grieving our lost freedom. We're grieving, you know, there's, you know, so, and that is a process, right? And it's not a light switch that we can turn on and off. And we all know the 7 stages of grief, but it's not like, okay, I'm doing the first and then the second and the third and then the fourth, you know, I can start at the 5th and then fly back to the 3rd. And, you know, so it's a process that we need to make time for, and we need to give space for. And I've been doing a lot of grief work throughout the pandemic with my clients.
Question, just for clarity for the audience, do you mind stating the 7 stages of grief for those who may not be familiar with those stages?
Sure. I'm just going to bring it up for myself so that I'm doing them in the order. So the 7 stages of grief are shock and denial, pain and guilt, anger and bargaining, depression, where am I? So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, that's the file. Sorry.
My apologies, I didn't mean to put you.
I just didn't want to forget any, and now I'm like, I'm in an internet hole. It's not being helpful.
We're in this together. I could totally help
Thank
out.
you,
I think it's,
sweetie.
is it reflection and loneliness that's missing?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Teamwork.
I know that we oftentimes see 5 stages of grief, 6 stages of grief,
Right.
and people may not even be familiar with the stages at all. So, but thank you for the teamwork in getting the stages out there. Another comment, Michael, thank you for sharing that breathing technique. It also is a form of meditation called toggling. I think I pronounced that correctly. If anyone is interested in looking into it. Okay. And I believe you already answered. So that first statement was when we played Michael's video. This person was thanking Michael for talking about the post-COVID syndrome, that they think many people are experiencing it and afraid to discuss for many reasons. Yeah.
Right. It's also, you know, I'm reflecting back to those early days of HIV and even today, you know, there's stigma attached to things, right? So what is the stigma of COVID? Is there a COVID stigma? And, you know, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for sharing. This was a great conversation, very fruitful. If anyone in the audience have any last thoughts or questions you may have, please place them in the Q&A box. In the meantime, do you have any last words you like to share with the audience?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Philadelphia Fight, Dr. Reader for being with us, and our panelists, and David Griffith for putting all this together. And it's been a great experience for me, and I hope it was for you as well.
Thank you. And thank you for being a great moderator, Keith. So if there isn't anything else, we're going to end this presentation. But for those of you still watching, please do not log off. When we end the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey. So please fill it out so we can hear from you of your experience of today's webinar. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay cool because it's a hot one out there in the city of Philadelphia. And so be kind to yourself as well. Take care.
Enjoy the view.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you, guys.